Okay, I've got what I need to do set up. Right, and we're showing the image again. Sorry about that little glitch. Okay. So, what are you seeing in your background with you? Hey. Right, that's good. That's good. We just had a little bit of a technical problem there. Now, I feel set amongst a moment in my own life where I'm starting to think that I need to let people express what they want to express. If they want to mention Celts and they want to mention Druids, even though I almighty don't agree with those types of things, it does take us into the area of things that people do believe, and things that people want to believe, and you can't change those thought patterns. But one thing is clear, and it directly goes into looking at Ogham, that Ogham itself, for me, is something that is readily understandable if you look at it as a language. If you look at it as a way and a means of portraying a form of language that people are unable to portray using the existing texts available at the time, either before the Roman period, which some people believe Ogham derived from, or at the Roman mindset, the Roman administration within the 300-400s AD in Britain. And what I'm basically blittering on about, Ogham is a way of people's expression for expressing their language, which they're unable to do so through the medium of the official language, which is Latin. So I got there roundabouts eventually. Ogham is a personal language. It's a language that we will all associate with the moment we first went to school and wrote our name on a piece of paper. And when we all wrote our name on a piece of paper in school, only we understood in that class what that name on that piece of paper read. So say, for example, we're all back in school, we're all 5 years old, and the teacher is telling Andy to write Andy on a piece of paper, to copy the word Andy on his piece of paper. John is being told to write John on his piece of paper. If you swap those pieces of paper around in the room, none of you will be able to understand the words on them, because you can only associate with the words that you've written on your piece of paper. That is called a personal language. When you're writing your name on a piece of stone in an Ogham text, it might be that you're able to write your own name, but you're unable to read somebody else's. That's a personal language. Whereas Latin, people are all expected to be able to read Latin in the Roman period, when in fact lots of people are unable to read it at all. If that isn't clear, hopefully part of what I've explained is clear, and by the end you'll understand those statements I've already made. Lots of Ogham texts can be found on stones in Wales, in Ireland, on the Isle of Man, Cornwall, and Scotland. And there are one or two areas of Ogham to be found in England. Now, Peter, this is the next point is very, very important, Peter. Right? When I was doing my research on this, it referred to the following: that there are no Ogham texts other than one or two found in England to be found anywhere in England at all. When in fact there's lots of Ogham texts in Cornwall. And I looked at this and I thought, I really don't understand this. the last time I looked, England was politically still part of England. And it got very confusing in my reading. We're going to move on from that because that'll be made a bit clearer later on in the lecture as well. So lots of unanswered questions. So the first slide that we're looking at is a stone in a recess in a church in Ireland. One of maybe up to 500 pieces of carved stone in Ireland that have Ogham text on them. I myself have seen Ogham text in one or two museums and places in West Wales. And one piece of Ogham text I've seen in a museum which is near us called Margam. Peter and I, with a group of others, when we went down to Tintagel, we went to the south coast, and we tried to find a church known as St. Lawrence. And when we went to St. Lawrence, I got very excited, and I said, in the church graveyard, there's a stone with Latin inscription on it, and there's Ogham text. So we all looked around the church graveyard. We couldn't find the Ogham text anywhere, only to be told that the Ogham text had been hacked off the stone not so many years ago. So we were naturally all very disappointed. And we were very disappointed with the fact that something so old and a text that is so fascinating had been removed from our visit that day. Anyway, moving on to the next text, or the next image. So the stone that we've just looked at, okay, this one can be said, if you look at a different angle, you've got the translation of the text on the right hand side. Now, I've actually got a little piece of paper that I wrote out about 30 years ago when I was originally starting to learn Ogham text. And Ogham is to be read from left to right, from bottom up, and it's to be read on the side of the stone. Sometimes you might get a carved line down the stone from bottom to top, and then the Ogham text is formed over that line to indicate an edge. Hopefully that is to be made clear. Ogham text is a cryptological text, and when we mean by cryptological text, each of the letters is then to be given a different meaning in Latin to give a word in Latin, hence is cryptological. The first figure on the left hand side of the screen itself, that figure itself is representative of an L. Okay, so if you look at the cursor there, that figure there is to be seen as an L. But this makes things extremely complicated. That's not an L in our alphabet. That's an L in the Ogham alphabet. Confused? It'll be made a little bit more clearer. Ogham is a very interesting language in that usually you can only find names or places carved on a stone. There are other Ogham works on vellum and other organic materials, but they are very restricted and they are very, very rare. If you're writing your name on a stone, you might shorten it. So Peter might be reduced to PTR, and then those cryptologically transferred into the Ogham script. And if you run out of space on the edge of the stone, you would start to bend the carving along the edge around the top of the stone. Okay, so naturally, I don't know if any of you have ever written from, obviously we all write from left to right. And when you get to the end of the line, you think, oh my God, I've run out of space, so I'll just put a little bit underneath on the right hand side. So if you put that on its side, that's the way you're looking at Ogham text. Again, if this isn't being made very clear, then it will eventually. So about Ogham, there are three schools of thought for why the Ogham script was created. I know it says two on there, but I'm going to add a third. The first postulates that Ogham was first produced by Irish scholars or Druids as a cryptic alphabet for political, military or religious reasons, perhaps to communicate with opposition to the Roman rulers in Britain. This is possible, as the Roman army represented a very real threat of invasion to Ireland at the time. But I'm going to personally reject that. And I'm going to personally reject that because Ogham itself, in a carved form on stone, become very popular in the middle part of the 300s. 300 years, more or less, after when the Romans should have invaded Ireland properly. So the idea that the Irish are trying to communicate something amongst themselves that is secret is a bit of a nonsense, really. And to carve something in stone and to try and keep it a secret from the Romans is also a bit of a nonsense. Moving on. The second possibility is that Ogham, and it's spelled here with a H, but in the ancient Irish script it was spelled without the H, was created by early Irish Christian communities as an alphabet for writing their own language, as Irish was regarded as difficult to transcribe using Latin alphabet, and the invention of a separate alphabet was deemed appropriate. It was a separate alphabet for a very short period of time, and if you look on the Ogham itself, was devised in the 300s and lasted to about the 600-700s. It was a very short alphabet, a very short transferal of what you're trying to say. And what do I mean by all this? What am I trying to say? When the Romans came to Wales, and the Romans came to Cumbria, and when the Romans came to Scotland, there were words and places that they were unable to pronounce. By that, they would undoubtedly make up place names. They would undoubtedly name peoples, which those peoples didn't call themselves by that name, because the Romans couldn't get their name around the tongue twisters. And in fact, Margaret reinforces that when she went to North Wales recently, when she said there were words that she was unable to pronounce. The Romans would simply make something a little bit closer because they couldn't pronounce those things. And that's exactly what we're saying about the Irish. The Irish have got things that they want to say and they want to communicate, but they're unable to do it through the communication of the Latin alphabet. So what they're doing, they've got to invent something else that is pronounceable. Back to what I said at the beginning. We go back to school and we write our name on a piece of paper. And when if your name is the only thing you're able to carve, that doesn't mean to say you're literate. But by putting it on a stone, you're owning your name. You might not be able to read anybody else's name, and you might not be able to read properly. But for you, writing your Ogham name on a stone is empowering yourself, is owning your name. Nobody else can really read your name, but you can. You can understand your name in Ogham text, okay? And it's very important to look at Ogham as that type of language, a language that actually broadcast who you were for the first time, because you were unable to do it through the medium of Latin. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say. And the third possibility is that we're starting to think that maybe Ogham did not come from Ireland at all. It may have originated in mainland Britain, in places on the periphery that had remained within the tradition of their ancestors, like Cornwall, like Cumbria, like the Isle of Man, and like Wales. And it might be that the Ogham text transferred over to Ireland with the spread of Christianity there, rather than the other way round. So as you can tell, Ogham is a very complicated instance of a language. Now, most of what you're confused about from what I've already said will be explainable in this article, which was written in 2011. It's one of those articles that I don't readily agree with all the content, because I like arguing with it. This is an example of one of two, maybe a couple more, of those Ogham stones being found in England. Ignoring the fact that Cornwall is politically part of England today. But if you ignore Cornwall, then there's only one or two places in England that Ogham texts are to be found. Okay? Before anyone says it, am I including Cumbria in England? Yes, I am. So there's no examples of Ogham in Cumbria. This is entitled The Enigma of Silchester's Ogham Stone. If you had been standing on the edge of a particular trench in Silchester on one day in 1893 and gazing down into the partially excavated shallow well in one of the areas of the Roman city Caliva Atrabatum, which is otherwise known as Silchester, which is southwest of modern-day Reading, in an area known as Insula 9. Basically, all Roman cities were divided into a grid pattern. Okay? Anyway, we don't really need that. You would have been lucky enough to see a very odd stone emerging, some 5 or 6 feet down. It's a Roman column base. There are no edges on a Roman column base because it's circular. So what you've got to do, you've got to carve a line down up, and you've got to carve lines up the stone, so you can start carving your Ogham text. And as I read each paragraph of this, you start to see the disarticulated thoughts of lots of archaeologists, unable to think outside the box. And bit by bit, we look at Ogham, but we knock out some of the wrong theories about Ogham as we're reading through the rest of this text. Further excavations, the archaeologists undertaken at Silchester would eventually reveal the stone shown in the picture, which was thrown in upside down, possibly to kill or ritually close the well. That's absolute nonsense. You know, archaeologists love using the word ritual, and therefore you give the stone ritual meaning. It's a stone with writing on it, okay? It's nothing more, nothing less. It's a stone with writing on it. For us, it's a massively important stone, but it's certainly not ritualistic. Moving on. There it is. Now, you're looking at this, it's in Silchester. It dates to a period before the 400s, when lots of Ogham texts are being carved in stone across Britain. Some people say that Ogham may have been carved in wood before it was carved in stone, and may actually be a pre-Roman language. 99% of all archaeologists don't believe in a pre-Roman language, because there's basically no proof for it. However, if Ogham was first carved into wood as a language before the Romans got here, we will never know. But this stone itself is intriguing. is found far away from Wales, and then far away from Ireland, and then the nonsense of archaeologists hits out in the rest of the article. Those with keen eyes amongst us will have noticed two things. Firstly, the stone had two strange sets of markings running vertically up one side. You can't have a side on a circular column on the face. Both with a line through the middle, secondly, and then you basically got lines indicating the letters, and the next bit of the sentence is nonsense. And here begins the enigma. The stone's inscription was in Ogham, an Irish script that spread to Wales, Cornwall, and West Coast Scotland. Silchester's Ogham stone was then and remains today not only the most easterly Ogham inscription ever found in Britain, but the only one found in England at all. So, Peter, Cornwall is no longer classed as England. More surprisingly, it is one of the very earliest of all Ogham inscriptions, probably dating from the early 400s. We've probably got well over 500 inscriptions rather than the 400 it's got here. And when we do think about the Ogham, it's usually found in areas that have been intensely researched by archaeologists. In areas that haven't been intensely researched by archaeologists, there are probably Ogham stones still left to find in northern Ireland and a central part of Wales when we look at later charts. The inscription reads, Ebiketos Makwe Mukio, which means Ebiketos, son of the tribe. And it said that the other line may relate to this stone is a memorial stone and relating to an area of land. But whatever this relates to, and whether this relates to a land marker or an ownership marker associated with Tibakatus, son of Ebiketus, or so on, it's very damaging to say that this is an Irish Ogham inscription. I mean, it's very damaging to presume that that this stone itself relates to an Irish person settling in Silchester, because I don't feel that the Ogham text itself is an Irish text. It might actually be, as I said, a Welsh text, and this idea of language spread over to Ireland. We shall never know. That's the third idea. It is probably a safe guess to assume there was more than one person there who understood Ogham script, unless Tibakatus oversaw the writing of his own epitaph. And it might be said that there's something similar at the Roman city of Wroxeter. It is unlikely that Tibakatus was an Irish raider, all the way at Silchester of all places. And it is uncertain the inscription implies a settled Irish community in Silchester. I would say it doesn't indicate an Irish community in Silchester. Quite possibly he was an Irish trader. Don't agree. And the stone was inscribed to commemorate his ownership of a townhouse sometime in the 300s or the 400s. I again think it's very dangerous to presume that from one stone that the person owned a house in Silchester. It's a stone, okay? It's got lines on it. Let's just focus on the fact that we've got Ogham text in Silchester. That to me is far more important than assuming anything else. In the 1980s, it was thought it may actually be a fake because it was found in Silchester. But lots of people now believe it is original. Like many things in the Roman period and many things throughout our history, the Ogham text found in Silchester and in lots of other places in Britain is yet still an enigma. And why not? In 1998, the Ogham Stones well was re-excavated, and they found that the filling from the well itself, the wooden oak beams found in the well, date the fact that if it connected with the stone itself, that it must date from about the AD 400s. But the fact of the matter is, we got quite an enigmatic Ogham text in Silchester, and I think that in itself, without presuming much, is very, very important. Moving on. When we start to think about Ogham in this next slide, we've got a list here in front of us, which to all of us, I'm sure, would make really no sense or have any much meaning to it. But what we do find, just if we take a section of this, we can see that at Kilmartin in southwest Scotland and in Kenfig in south Wales, we've got two stones that are marked here, inscribed stones, and both of them have Ogham text on them. And this is one part of those inscriptions that we find from the 300s all the way through to the 500-600s. And there's lots of Ogham texts out there which are associated with Latin and other inscriptions. It can be said that in Ireland there are no Ogham texts alongside Latin scripts, but most of the ones in Wales are associated with Latin scripts, and in fact those found in Scotland are associated with Pictish carvings. It's almost as if there's something else being said there. Maybe you could work it out yourself, guys. Nice bit of information here. Ogham itself. Ogham itself, O-G-A-M, comes from the Old Irish word, which means the point of a sharp weapon. In other words, Ogham itself is created by a sharp weapon. And it's later on, so you add the H in there, and it's basically thought that that's the way you should really pronounce it. I've said that we've got a large number in Ireland, and we've got examples in Cornwall, Scotland, and Wales. But there is a huge concentration of Ogham texts in south west Wales, in Pembrokeshire. And those texts in southwest Wales, in Pembrokeshire, are usually associated with Latin. That very Latin that Peter and I went to see at St. Lawrence Church on the south coast. And Peter, I'm loath to say whether St. Lawrence was in Cornwall or Dorset. It was in Cornwall, wasn't it? Yeah. Right, okay. That's why I didn't say it. It was very frustrating because I really wanted to touch a Latin text and an Ogham text in sort of a contemporary setting, and that was removed from me because the Ogham itself felt very personal, and it was gone. But that's people, isn't it? We like to destroy our past, don't we? But we don't. So that's basically an example in Scotland. You could see a beautifully carved stone, and this line itself, okay, is meant to indicate that line that you carve along. That's a letter M, and that's a letter A, and that's a letter Q. Okay, so we got M, A, Q, make way, which would represent son of, and the rest of the carving continues all the way up the stone. And this is a Pictish stone. It's Pictish, but there's Ogham there. And what we're not doing is removing a person's identity and carving Ogham on it. of carving Ogham on it and removing removing the identity and so on. We've got it all together. So in other words, Ogham is not a destructive language, if that's coming across. It's a language that is very, very much connected with an individual. Moving on. Or individuals. Now, I don't often like cutting into what you can find on Wikipedia on the internet, but I found something quite interesting in here. Don't always trust what you see on Wikipedia, but there was something that rang true here. In this first line, it says, "Origins of Ogham. It has been argued that the earliest inscriptions in Ogham date to about the 300s, but a writer known as James Carney believed its origin is rather within a period before the birth of Christ, which is dangerous to even presume that. Having a language that evolves in Britain before Latin, well, make up your own mind on that. It's a cipheric script. Some people believe that it directly, some people believe its origins are from the Latin, which goes against everything I've said. Some people believe its origins are in the Greek. Some people are in a self-devised language, which is probably more closer to what I'm suggesting. And again, I don't think it's a hidden language. It wants to be displayed. Sandra outside her house, she wants to have an Ogham text to show Sandra lives here. Peter lives here. I don't really need you to read my name, right? I own my name and I don't really need you to pronounce it, okay? This is my name and this is where I live. If you wrote Sandra lives here in Latin, everyone back in the day is hopefully being able to read it. And there's no secret there. Hence, by preserving that sense of mystery, then that's very important. But there is one thing that I'm missing here, right? If you're somebody who actually can read Ogham and you're literate in it, you will be able to read Sandra's name carved into the stone outside her house, because I taught her how to carve her name. And I taught Peter how to carve his name, okay? And I taught the guy down the road how to carve his name in a stone. But it's very likely that only a few people were able to read Ogham in the first place. And when it became extinct, the secrets of being able to broadcast Ogham and to be able to read the secrets were lost with the memorials of the names of those people carved into the stone. And that is true magic. We also see a similar magic when we look at Pictish carvings. We rightly don't understand Pictish carvings, but they're not really done in the form that Ogham is carved in. Lots of languages out there have a sense of mystery. When I was teaching to children on Sunday, the Etruscan language of all things, it was something that made me think that people wishing to keep what they're trying to say amongst their community was very important, and to keep the language amongst a few people and to keep it legible to a small class of people. And you start to see that Latin was meant to be read by everybody. Peter going to school reading Latin from his teacher, Sandra learning Latin at the market. She's the daughter of a peasant family. But Ogham's different, if that's coming across. Moving on. I started to think that runic is very similar to Ogham. Runes come in a lot later. When I say a lot later, they come in after Ogham text has started to fall away. A runic script is something that you can read and understand. We've been able to translate all of it and to be able to understand all of the runic inscriptions. There's beautiful runic inscriptions out there. We know that the Varangian Guard was actually at the Hagia Sophia in Byzantium, because there's runic carvings in the marble. We're able to know that the Vikings were in the burial chamber at Maes Howe in Orkney. We're able to read it. It tells a story. You only need Ogham itself to transmit only a part of the story, where runic was meant to tell the full story. Latin was meant to tell the full story. And again, a little bit more explanation, Carl. I keep a diary, and I write what I've been doing in the day, and the average page of my diary, for example, that's an average page of my diary. But some people might write in their diary 2 words, okay? That is the diary of an Ogham person, and that is a diary of a Latin person. And the point being said is that they're 2 different languages, 2 different ways of communication for 2 different types of people. There's more about what we've already said here. Some people say that when they were trying to get people to understand Christianity in those communities in Cornwall, in those communities in Wales, the Isle of Man, and Ireland and Scotland, they needed to put it across in a localized way. And Ogham was being dragged into that. From the Latin, it was being dragged in to try and get some people to communicate with the Bible, with the Christian text, because they weren't able to understand the Latin, so use something that they might be able to understand. Remember, they've written their name in Ogham. Now let's move it a little bit further. Let's let them start understanding Christianity using Ogham. But it really didn't get off the ground. It really, really didn't. It was probably a bit too more complicated than it should have been. Do you know, I said at the beginning, I said about let's not ignore fantasy. Let's not ignore druids and Arthur and Celts and things that go bump in the night. I might not believe it, but some of you guys do. And in that, I've got something interesting, which is in front of us. A variation is that the alphabet was first invented, for whatever reason, in the 300s at Irish settlements in West Wales, right? So somebody's saying it actually was invented in Wales and went over to Ireland. Great. But it had to be Irish settlements in Wales. All right, fair enough. After contact and intermarriage with Romanized Britons with the knowledge of the Latin alphabet. That's why we see Latin stones with Oghamic texts on, you know. In fact, several Ogham stones in Wales are bilingual. There's a lot more than that, containing both Irish and British Latin. Latin, basically. Testifying to the international contacts that led to the existence of some of these stones. Right, okay, fair enough. Another theory for Ogham is noted by a writer known as McAllister. He's been completely mothballed now, but some people still believe this, so I'll do it. Find little favour today. McAllister believed that Ogham was first invented in Gaul. 600 years BC. 1,000 years before the first carved stones that we see today in the archaeology. It said that it was devised by Gaulish druids as a secret system of hand signals and carved into stone, and may have been inspired from a form of the Greek alphabet current in northern Italy at the time. 600 years BC? Who was in northern Italy 600 years BC? The bloody Etruscans. After doing that on Sunday and doing my Ogham last week, to read that, I thought, how interesting. How very interesting. And maybe I might believe some of this. According to this theory, the alphabet was transmitted in an oral form or on wood only, until it was finally put into a written form on stone inscriptions in Christian Ireland, Wales. Later scholars are largely united in rejecting this theory, but it might have some credence. I don't think I want to go any further with that, but I just wanted to drop that in there. As Andy and Gilbert can remember me saying in my first lectures in Arnside, where there's a myth and a legend, there's a fact waiting to be told. Now, okay, now this is how it's read. If you can get this up there. And this is where it can start to get really complicated. So we'll just do this side here. That line there. You got that line? Good. This is where it gets complicated. Number 1 is directly translated to the Latin A. So the character B in Ogham is translated to a Latin A. And an Oghamic L is translated to a B in Latin. And an F is translated to a C. So can you see why it's cryptic? There's a cryptological way of looking at this. So those lines are one single line on the right-hand side of the face, or the right-hand side of the line on a piece of paper, i.e. that there, okay, the B, okay, that refers to an A. So a line is an Ogham B, and a B in Latin is an A. And if those of you are glazing over, don't worry about it. You need to spend a whole year on this to really get to grips with it. And it's looking about some pronunciations there. Anyway, what I want to do now is I want to basically go on to explaining what I've just explained there just a couple of seconds ago. And I want us to look at this in front of us, okay? Corpus inscriptions. Monumental Ogham inscriptions, as we know, are found in a number of different places, even in Shetland. They were mainly employed as territorial markers and memorials, as I've mentioned. The stone commemorating Vortiporius, a king of Dyfed in the 500s, is the only Ogham stone inscription that bears the name of an identifiable individual that's linked directly into written history elsewhere. That's what that means. The language of the inscriptions is predominantly primitive Irish, but who's to say what language that is? Apart from the few examples in Scotland, and we're looking at the Pictish language there. The more ancient examples are standing stones where the script was carved into the edge, which we've already looked at. The text of these is Orthodox Ogham inscriptions, which is read from the bottom left-hand side of a stone continuing upwards along the edge, across the top and down the right-hand side. And it says here that roughly 380 inscriptions are known in total, up to 500, and a large majority of these to be found, highest concentration in Munster in Ireland and in Pembrokeshire in Wales. Later inscriptions are known as scholastic, where by about the 500s they're desperately trying to use Ogham to point it into a new direction, to use Ogham to push the faith of Christianity across the neck of the woods of the whole of Britain, basically. Something that people might readily be able to understand, and not the Latin. And I need to explain something more about that as well. Latin is a very complex thing to learn indeed. I wouldn't even attempt to learn Latin today. And I don't know if any of you have seen the Monty Python film, and Graham Chapman paints Romans Go Home on the Temple of Herod in the film. I know it's comedy, but there's a whole scene where there's a Roman centurion teaching him how to write properly in Latin, and that gives you an overview to how complicated Latin really is. So in fact, Ogham is the next best thing. In fact, Ogham is actually starting to come into fashion. I wanted to chuck this in here. It's got 25 characters, a bit like the Latin. In the English language, as you know, there's 26 characters. Ogham script, the marks on the edge of this pillar stone are characters from an alphabet that was used in Ireland. And there you go. It's, if any of you copied this out, it helps us out there. So you got, there you go, B, A. So if you read from the left to the right, A from the bottom, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, whatever. And then you read over, and then you've got another 5 characters. So there you go. And there it is. This is, and it's said by one historian that Ogham itself is meant to represent 20 of the 25 characters are meant to represent trees. Okay, so the character A in Latin, which is the character B in Ogham, is meant to represent the tree known as a birch. And there it is, the Ogham tree grove. And I know some of you are thinking this is absolute bonkers, but this is Ogham, and this is exactly what we're doing. And there we go. It's said that, you know, each of these represents a tree, and by the way the little bits are on it, they somehow represent the tree. Anyway, moving on. And again, from this immediately, when you look at this, you can see a nice standing upright stone, and there's a Christian cross on it. So, you know, we've come full circle, really. And the way we've come full circle is that we're seeing that the Ogham text itself may have been as a subversive attempt to forestall Romans understanding what you're trying to say, okay, which I said was nonsense. But there's something hidden in what I've just said. Ogham probably appeared before Christianity, and then, like many things, Ogham was hijacked by Christianity. And we can see that with the cross. Ogham, again, is used as a vehicle by Christianity to spread the word. Again, moving on. Now, one thing about lots of Latin inscriptions, like the Ogham, they like to use the word make way, which means sun. And when you, that's a clue to what came first. Did the Irish Ogham inscriptions without the Latin come first, or the ones on the mainland in Cornwall and Wales come first? By using the word make way, and it's basically saying, you know, son of so and so, this stone was erected by son of, and so on. It's quite likely that the ones in mainland Britain, in Cornwall, Ogham was invented in mainland Britain. That's what I'm saying. And then the idea of using the Ogham alone, but using son of, in this case, son of Methloga in Ireland without the Latin, says that we don't need the Latin in Ireland. We'll just leave it in Wales, but we'll just use the Ogham. And it's just a way of saying, you know, this stone itself relates. When you're saying son of, it's a Roman way of usage rather than an Irish way of usage of saying who the stone belonged to or who the stone's linked to. Hopefully that makes sense. This stone itself is was found in 1975. And I don't know, I know Sandra would have probably been there, John maybe, and Peter. There's a church in West Wales called Nevin Church, and it's got a bleeding yew tree. And in Nevin Church graveyard, standing tall in Nevin Church graveyard, is a runic stone. What's that?
I've been there, yeah.
Yeah. And there's one in a church graveyard, and there's one used as a sill inside the church at Nevin. And it's almost as if the language was so lost that it was used as a sill inside the church. But the carvings, unlike the example that we saw at St. Lawrence in England, in Cornwall. Sorry, Pete, that wasn't deliberate. They've kept the Ogham because they linked it with Christianity in most other cases. And it's remained there. And you can think that Ogham stones, because they're nice tapering, you can use them as fence posts, or you can use them as sills in churches, or if they're big enough, if they're sort of a bit more rectangular, you can use them as an altar stone in a Christian church, and why not? And lots of them do survive because they've been reused and not smashed up. And the fascinating thing to be said about Ogham, is it not, that because the personal nature has been lost, because it was always personal, nobody was meant to really understand it in the first place, in the beginning. People have just thought there's just a few lines on the stone, let's just bang it in the church as a fence post or as a gravestone for somebody else, and let's put some other inscriptions in it. So that's why Ogham has survived. So this inscription hopefully this making sense. An example of an Ogham stone in the ground of Rattus Church in Tralee in County Kerry, Ireland. The inscription was discovered in 1975. It had been built into the sides of a tomb from the 1800s in the southwest corner of the church, and is now on exhibit inside the church. And basically, Neme Silian Makeway Fatilog, which basically into the Ogham, which means Silan, son of Thethloga, the Roman way of writing, which had gone over to Ireland in an Ogham form. I'm not going to say the following, but I will. Maybe cynically, Ogham is the final stab of civilization in Britain trying to influence Irish society. And they bring it back at us, using it for their odd and distorted words that nobody else can understand, to try and understand the Christian Gospels. And as tonight sounds very complicated, it got very complicated back then, and Ogham fell out of use. We got more to do of Ogham after the break, but before we completely go on without break, because I'm waiting for a knock at the door, I would like to look at some articles of the week. Yeah, go on. How well has this been happening much tonight? Well, if somebody had said that in the first place. Now we got some interesting articles of the week. One is quite disturbing, and everyone that I've read this to has got very angry. Scientists revive Neanderthal brains for comparison with humans. Scientists are to bring Neanderthal brains to life to see how humans differ from their closest relatives. The tiny blobs of tissue around the size of a lentil will be grown from human stem cells edited to contain Neanderthal DNA. The so-called brain organoids are incapable of thoughts or feelings, but will replicate the basic structures of an adult brain. And this is being done at the Leipzig Institute. Neanderthals are the closest relatives to everyday humans. So if we should define ourselves as a group of or a species, it is really them that we should compare ourselves to. We're seeing if we can find basic differences in how nerve cells function that may be a basis for why humans seem to be cognitively so special. The lab has been at the forefront of efforts to crack the Neanderthal genome, and last year published papers shedding light on how many traits we owe to our ancestors. Now, I don't want to read any more of this, but I think that's absolutely horrific. You know, they're in the name of archaeology, they're trying to understand Neanderthals by creating the brain and assuming that brain will not have any thoughts or feelings. That to me is a living organism, and that to me is absolutely horrific. Does everybody else feel the same as me? They're creating a Neanderthal brain in a laboratory. Yep, but they're creating a brain that's saying this. How do you know? So none of you agree with me on that. Does anyone agree with me? Well, to be honest with you, everyone else in all my other classes did agree with me. I don't know what can be gay. Actually, okay, we all agree on that. What is the point? It doesn't actually make that clear. It really doesn't. Uh, okay, we can beg to differ on that one. And there's three other things here. They're celebrating. I don't know if you were around back in the day, about a few decades ago, when they reconstructed the head of Philip II of Macedon. And yeah, you can remember, Sandra, and they actually had the skull of Philip of Macedon, where it was all caved in on one side, and they worked out the tissue measurements of where the flesh would be, and the muscle would be, and they were able to reconstruct the head of Philip II, and it looked very similar to one of the carvings, didn't it, Sandra? Vagina. Yeah. Well, the whole point is now we've come a long way, and they're producing. I don't know if you can see these images. They're producing really lifelike images of whole human sets of skeletal remains now, and I think that is of great benefit. So we're able to look into the faces of these people. We got one of Otzi, the Iceman, here, and we've got all this. We've got all this rebuilding of people, and I think that's absolutely fascinating that we're actually doing that a lot more now. And they're putting old historical and archaeological publications which date from the 1800s online, which I'm not sure is a good idea, to be honest with you. But that's because I'm a book author and I wouldn't like my book online. But that's another thing that they're doing. And 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 this as well, another article of the week. Rise and fall of ancient world under the ice. Ice sheets in Greenland chart the rise and fall of the Greek and Roman empires, a study has found. Lead emissions from mining and smelting in Europe drifted with the winds across the ocean and were covered in snowfalls. Now, for the first time, scientists have been able to measure and accurately date the deposits and show the rise and fall of ancient European civilizations. It said, we have found that lead pollution in Greenland very closely tracked known plagues, wars, social unrest, and imperial expansions during European antiquity. The highest levels coincided with the height of the Roman Empire and fell sharply during plagues. So I think that's, we're being able to go off to a distant land. And what they're trying to say is that, with the melting of the ice, we need to get out and record these things before that information's gone. So what we're going to do now, we're gonna take a break. And are there any questions so far? Oh, go on, give me one of your questions, Gilbert. I'm not having them all at the end. Come on, let's have one now. Let's have Gilbert's first. Go on, Gilbert. Why you so? Why you say? Because I mentioned. What do you mean by that? Because what I'm saying is that we've got Ogham in Britain and Ireland, but I was looking. I mentioned runic is obviously a language that you're able to use a lot more and widely, and I was saying that Ogham isn't. That was my point. What's that? Not that we've come across it, and this is the very interesting area. Not that we've come across it further away, and to be honest with you, I think this is touching on a very sore point, because when we look at the evolution of Christianity, and where Christianity came from, we find our form of Christianity coming from the Romans, and the Irish don't like to admit it, but obviously, if we're looking at Ogham and we're looking at Latin, Christianity is moving from mainland Britain over to Ireland, and then it's reorganizing itself and it's coming back over. So, with that said, we don't rightly expect to see Ogham on the continent, because Christianity isn't really needing to travel to the continent, because it doesn't need to. But then again, that could be a real blinkered way of me looking at it. Who else wanted to say something there?
It's me. Just going on and nothing.
It, it it's a very, yeah, it's a jumble. It's a very complicated language. It is a jumble, but back to what I said at the beginning. That was my initial point I was trying to make. That if you're for example, you've got this carving on here, right? And you've got just briefly saying you've got 10 characters here, right? That's nothing more than saying son of Dave. That's it, right? And if you're able to just know that, you've been taught that by somebody, right? Those are your characters for your name. Go off and carve it, right? You don't need to have any other characters. You don't need to be able to know Peter's name, right? Because all you're doing is carving your name. And that's what this is about. It's a personal language, not a language like Latin. That's what I'm trying to say. So when they're using this personal language, in a form of language like Latin that you're able to directly translate the whole Bible. You're unable to do it because it's so complicated. And that's the point we're making. This is why it became extinct. You can tell I'm getting very excited about this, but I don't think you can get any more excited than that. I'm going to have my cup of tea. And may Andy's heart well in great torment with his cakes that the rest of us ain't eating. All right then, man. I will. I'm going to do it now. So that's got to be the longest stretch I've done in a long time. So um, we're not far from the end, really. So 10 minutes, right? And we're straight down to my undies. I'm gonna look this up now. So break. I'm glad. When I were young, this were nothing but bloody housing estate. It's me again. Good. Back to this chart. All the red ones there on this map indicate actual Ogham stones. And the ones with dots in are Ogham stones still in their original localities. So the point with this is that we've got lots of Ogham stones still out there in church graveyards 1,500 years later. They ain't all been ripped up and put in church graveyards. They ain't all been ripped up and put in museums, for example. So lots of Ogham stones are still in their original settings. Well, you can see this area of Wales where the cursor is known as Pembrokeshire. This is Glamorganshire, where I and Peter live. Nobody knows where Sandra lives because you're a bit of a woman of the night. This area here is Breckenshire Way, and this area is North Wales. And you'll notice in the middle that there's no stones which actually have Ogham on them in the centre of Wales. It's probably because this area of central Wales has been understudied. And it's likely at one point there were lots of Ogham stones spread all over Wales to give a projection of who you are, your name, and the community you live in. This is all important stuff. John. Oh, nobody cares about Newport. That's not even part of Wales. Exactly. What, from Derbyshire? Oh, just get on with it. Right, anyway. The area that I live in, right, on this chart in front of us, will start to make sense now. In this chart in front of us is known as Gloy Oesig. Gloy Oesig. And Gloy Oesig was the old name for Glamorganshire that we actually live in. And throughout the whole area, it's showing here that there's up to 4 stones that have Ogham text on them. Now this one here, Kenfig, is the one that I'm interested in most. And the reason why I'm interested in this one most is because that's the one in a museum known as the Mangum Museum. And Mangum. And I want to look at this text a minute. It says the distribution. I can't zoom in on this properly. The distribution of Ogham stones in Wales is closely reflects the geopolitical situation of post-Roman Britain. That things are starting to collapse. They're associated with the growing kingdoms in Wales as things start to deteriorate. Okay, so as Roman administration is collapsing in Wales, what we do see is people wanting to lay their mark on the landscape. And how do you do that? As Latin is now diminishing as the language of the street by about the 410s, 420s, 430s. Those people who have setting up their own kingdoms in the vacuum of collapsing Roman Wales in particular, and even the likes of collapsing Roman Cumbria and other places that are really starting to get the hit by the 420s and that type of time. They want some other kind of representation, and Ogham is the way to represent yourself. Where are we now? Oh, now this chart itself is rather interesting, is it not? The one we're looking at this minute. And the reason why this chart that we're looking at this minute is interesting is it wants to show Ogham as it's spreading into the rest of the land. And there's a big problem with this chart. And the problem lies in Cornwall. Now, if you want to sort of settle and spread yourself, it's probably likely Cornwall's the most unlikely place to go. You're more likely to go to Cumbria. We don't have any Ogham in Cumbria, really, that we know of to date. You might go to Scotland, you might go to the Isle of Man, you might go to North Wales, and you might go to West Wales. But Cornwall is probably the most furthest point you would go, and you'd more likely go to places like Bristol, this area, and we don't have any Ogham text. So what I'm trying to say with this chart is that Ogham itself probably foundingly originated in mainland Britain, and it spread from Wales over to Ireland, from sort of North Wales over to Ireland, and basically from Cornwall over to Ireland, not the other way round. That's what I'm saying anyway, and I'm going to stick to it. Yeah, go for it. Yeah. The Isle of Man, the Anglesey, the Isle of Man, some of the islands in Scotland. Yeah. I think it's rather odd, and it's well, actually, Sandra, there's an answer to that. It's quite clear. The answer is quite clear that this is the problem with archaeology. Archaeological evidence is the interesting one there, Andy. Archaeological evidence is to be found in areas that haven't been developed on and intensely damaged by later civilization. And it's in places like Anglesey, places like the Scillies, places like West Wales, places like the Isle of Man, places like the west coast of Scotland, where you're going to find the evidence of Ogham, but you're not going to find it in other places because the areas have been massively altered. So there's going to be biases with this table before we start, and finding evidence on the islands explains, and the arrows explains what you've just said, basically, in another way roundabout. Does that answer it, Sandra? Good. Go. Well, we can't look at Ogham as that early, but I actually see your point. On some of the islands, would it not be that the islands, even in the Iron Age, 2,500 years ago, were still being themselves sparsely populated? So I don't really know what we're getting at here, but obviously finding Ogham in these places, and areas where you can move something like this would be plausible. But that would mean they would be coming from Ireland in the first place, which I'm rejecting. So but that's me rejecting it. Obviously, it's good that we've got different ideas here, which is fine. So never dismiss these things. So we're looking at this chart here, okay, and what we're seeing here is in Wales. I know it's not very clear for everybody. It's not very clear in front of me either. But all these blue dots on here show where there are carved stones in Wales with inscriptions on. It's only a few of these, up to 50, actually have Ogham on them. But naturally, there's a nice spread of stones with carvings on them in Wales anyway. Carving is the language of the time. So what we're going to do now is, the last bit that we're going to really do is this stone here, which is a stone of Pompeius Caratorius. Now the Pompeius Caratorius stone, and I will enlarge this up. The Pompeius Caratorius stone is a lovely stone that's to be found in the Margam Stones Museum, with a history all to itself. It's got Latin on it, and it's got Ogham on it, and it's a stone that's been moved around like one of those gate posts that I mentioned earlier on. And I did mention one thing that I've completely missed. If you've got an Ogham stone and it's been moved around and the Ogham stone's been reversed, then when you're reading it, the lines on the Ogham will read differently than the original way round. So we do have that problem, but let's not overcomplicate it. So I know this ain't clear, but if you look at this, you can clearly see, if I enlarge, the Roman writing on here, the Latin, is a little bit more childlike than the Times Roman that you would usually see. Now, as I say, things were deteriorating, and people that still knew Latin were doing it on a budget. Let's say it that way. So if we look at this stone here, let's have it. What we've got this is being read from bottom to top, and then on another side, you've got a little bit of carving here. Some actually say that this is carved first. This refers to Pompeius. And then there's another carving on this side, so it'd go from left to right rather than this being first. This says Pompeius in Ogham, and here's another carving altogether. So what they're doing, you've got Pompeius Caratorius, which is the original inscription on the stone, maybe from about the 500s. I would say the 400s. And around that time, somebody's saying, oh, we've got a bit of Latin, right? Let's chuck a bit of Ogham on it, right? So they're doing that. And then later on, they put another inscription on it. Now, we're able to work out the dates of these inscriptions because the patination on it, the patina on them. And if we go to the exact translation, I know we're concentrating on one stone. It's not that one. Here we go. I know this is far away from people who might know it, but this gives an idea of what these stones are about. Just one example is better than a million. This stone is also known as the Pompeius stone, the Cenfig stone, named after the area that it was found within, not necessarily the area that it was actually from, because it's been moved around. It's known as the gravestone of Prince Morgan, which has nothing to do with the name Pompeius Caratorius. This is how we do things in Wales. The stone was first recorded in 1578, so is important back then. Lots of stones, as we've already said, with the example from St. Lawrence Church, are now lost with the Ogham script on them. It's a square pillar of old red sandstone, a local stone. Lots of these were usually carved in local stones. Now, the difference between these stones and, say, for example, a Latin stone, just with Latin on it from the Roman period, it might be a marble or a stone brought in, but they had no airs and graces. They just use a local stone. Lots of these stones are about 1 meter in height, 1.5 meters in height, no more than that. Not like the massive Pictish stones, not like the huge ornamental Latin stones, but no more than about 1.5 meters in height. That was about regular. 2 areas of the Ogham script appear, written as notches alongside of the stone on the same face as the Latin inscription, the left and the right hand side. Definitely read from left, from the bottom to the top, and bottom from the top on the other side. But the other inscription is a lot longer. Some say it dates from the 500s. I say it dates from earlier. Pompeius Caratorius basically means the stone of Pompeius, son of Caratorius. These are a Roman and Latinized British name. So what we're saying there is that as things start to break down, people are looking towards the Latin, and they're looking towards their own language, and they're struggling. And then you've got Ogham, or maybe Ogham's already there. It's a difficult way to look at this. And the Ogham, the word in the Ogham is simply a P, and an S. And that basically Pompeius stands for Pompeius, initialed, as I said at the beginning ages ago. And the other thing as well is that the other Ogham inscription is of somebody else. Rolacum, son of Luna. And in a moment, you're seeing history change. Initially, the stone relates to Pompeius Caratorius. There is an Ogham inscription, a translation relating to Pompeius. But later on, or earlier on, who's to say what was first, Ogham or the Latin? But the thing is, when you're reading it on the right-hand side, Rolacum, son of Iluna, is another inscription related to somebody else who now takes possession of the stone. If you ever heard this term, take possession of the soul, you've taken possession of the stone, you've taken possession of the area around the stone, therefore the stone now represents you. You have now taken over the stone. But the original carvings haven't been taken away. This is what's so important about the Ogham. It's the Ogham does not erase early inscriptions, as we see with later civilizations, where we hack out inscriptions of earlier people. The Egyptians did this. You had a pharaoh, they would hack out the name of the previous pharaoh and stick a new name on there, right? Isis blowing up all those statues and stuff, bringing their own mark to history. Ogham was a personal representation, and you respected the other person who had another representation on the stone. And this is why I see Ogham so fascinating, connected with the personality rather than the civilization. And finally, the stone previously stood beside a Roman road, or a Roman lengthy road known as Water Street in Kenfig, and was then taken to a church yard in Margam, and then it moved to a roadside location, and then it eventually moved to the museum between 1928 and 1945, and there it is pride of place in the museum. So we love these stones because they're very personal, and they tell a story throughout the ages. And if anyone's ever got an opportunity to see an Ogham stone, go and see it, because they're very much well worth the effort of the visit. We were disappointed not to see the one at St. Lawrence when I had a group of people there, knowing how wonderful these Ogham stones actually are. I've actually nearly come to the end today. There is nothing else. So what there is one other thing. Peter asked me to do a little bit of research. Now, I've not answered the question. There are people writing about, in Ireland and on the continent, and they're wishing to make the language of Ogham their own in Brittany and other places in Spain and so on. But I'm struggling to see whether Ogham does have a family of sites on the continent. I would need a little bit more research on that one, and I can't answer that question, John. If it does exist on the continent, I need to do a lot more reading, and it's something that I'm not going to come across on the internet. But there's indication that there might be something on the continent, but I can't answer that question. Next week we're doing Ephesus. So next week takes us to literature again. It takes us to the wonderful civilization of Rome, a place that some of us may have visited. And on that note, I would like to ask if there are any questions before we finish tonight. Do you know what? If I've ever fallen into a trap, hook, line, and sinker, that definitely it. I appreciate that comment, Gilbert. John doesn't. Peter does though. Are there any questions? It's taken him 2 hours to come up with that though. Exactly. Andy, what were you going to say? Yeah, in this yeah, it yeah, but we do have waves of early Christianity going directly to Cumbria from Ireland. But I think that it has to be asked, where did Christianity come from to get to Ireland in the first place? And my only answer is it would have come from West Wales. Because I don't know anybody else who's come up with a plausible explanation. Okay, then you're going in a little boat from Galicia. You're going all the way over to Ireland first. I'm sorry, no, you're going to land in Cornwall, or you're going to land in Wales first. The first place you see is Wales, Pembrokeshire, and then you look over. So, if we want to conclude, we're looking at Ogham developing in Wales as an answer to a problem of a decaying decaying language, Latin, and you're using Latin alongside Ogham, and then you've got this Christian development, and it's going over to Ireland, and the Irish do their own thing with Ogham. They don't need the Latin; they do their own thing. But then again, it's a really complicated area. But then again, it brings in with what Andy's just said. You know, you've got the monasteries and Ogham, and then eventually it becomes extinct, and then basically Latin becomes the language of choice again, as monks have got time to sit down and learn Latin. Before we've got turmoil in Britain, and Ogham seems the response to that turmoil. And naturally, with anything, when you don't need something, you just dispense of it. It's like today, we've got text, right? I still don't know what LOL means. I still don't know what TBM means and all these things, right? Because I write, if I'm going to write a text, I write a text, right? But people simplify things, and that's exactly what Ogham is. It's a personal simplification language. Yes. Oh, not the Druids again. Right, okay. There's no such thing as Druids, Anna. Right, okay then. If there's no more questions tonight, we'll say goodbye to Anne's side, then John and Peter. Night, Gilbert. Where are we next week, Andy? All right then. Okay. Anyway, thanks for the use of your home, Andy, and your computer. Night night, Andy and Margaret and Gilbert, and we'll see you next week. Bye. It's a pleasure. Bye. Bye bye. Bye bye. The last thing I saw then was Gilbert's backside. And talking about backsides, I've got to go now, John. So hopefully everything's working out and we've enjoyed listening to the birds. They've gone now. That's true. Anyway, John, I can see you're tired. I will see you next Tuesday then. And we're getting some prizes together, John. So we'll have to. You need to come over here. Because Michelle and I want to show off our ducks. Yeah. No, John. See you next week. Don't forget the shekels. No, John. No. God does know, John. God loves you, John. What? We're still there. We're playing with our toggles. You can tell that John's got a completely different version than you, Peter, of Skype. Yeah, I know. I'm just talking about you. I don't think the drugs work with John, Peter. Anyway, John, we're going to ignore you now, so I'll see you next week. Yeah. I don't know. John and Peter, Sandra. I will no doubt see you next week. Why's that? Hang on. John's screen is frozen. Hang on. Hang on. Right. Are you still there, Pete? Right. John, right. Go for it. Yeah. What the China or the Dutch dresser? Michelle? Sandra wants to know if you want a Dutch dresser with a load of China. She said, wonderful, that'd be fantastic. The Dutch dresser comes apart. Oh, I tell you what I'll do, I'll send Michelle down there and you can have a load of raffle prizes at the same time. Have you got any Delft in there? Yeah. Well, while I'm with Michelle, what do you expect? I do like old things. Give her a ring, Michelle. Okay. She said it sounds wonderful. She does like old things. That's why she fancies Pete. Apparently, you've got to go over with Pete on a working weekend in June, and you've got to stay in the same room as Linda. She thought she's the only person who said that Linda sounds quite interesting. What do you mean she moans all the time? Oh God! All right then, Sandra. I really appreciate that. I do, and we'll. Well, Michelle's been thinking that with me for ages, but she haven't. But like the courage, eh? Look at what I gotta put up with for God's. Hey, I tell you what, right? She's got somebody in work, right? And she goes into work. She's telling them all about history and archaeology, and they say, I don't know how that bloke puts up with you, Michelle. It's usually the other way round, but like. Anyway, I got a dash because I got to have my chips. I've had my chips already. Anyway, I will see you next Tuesday, guys. And Pete, can you do me a favour? Can you get in contact with Filthy Rog? Yeah, find out what he's doing. Oh, do you want me to ring him? Do you? The problem is, if I ring him, I then got to phone you to tell he's going or not. Do you want me to read out his number now? Well, here we go. It's okay. His mobile number is 07 79 11 49 532. You got it? I'll read that again. 07 791 149 532. And his landline, if you want it, is Cardiff 521108. Got that? Cardiff 521108. All right then, I got a dash. So I'll see you. I'll see you next Tuesday, guys. Thanks for coming, and I'll see you next week.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Sandra. Thanks for that, Pete. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye. I'm going to press off. Tra. Yeah, I'm still here. I'm going to press off. Tra.